This is a quick walkthrough, Chapter 2 of the textbook that is used for this course. If Chapter 1 took us through the first 11 chapters, more or less, of the book of Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, Chapter 2 of the textbook goes through chapters 12 through 50. It is, of course, a quick survey. It's like a bird's eye view, like when you travel by plane and you see the ground below from a distance. It does not take time to view everything down there. It highlights some specific things, and what is going to be highlighted in this chapter is a particular person, and more importantly, a particular word or concept, which is the concept of covenant. Covenant is not a word that we use often today. It is a word, however, that we may refer to in other ways. For example, a covenant is an agreement or a contract, compact. In political terms, it could be called a treaty, a deal in business, a bargain, a settlement. All of these words are synonyms of the word covenant. We don't use the word covenant as much. Covenant implies religious connotations, and it is definitely the word that you will use in this particular look at Genesis 12, even through 50. Your authors in their quick survey emphasize this concept, and so we begin with a look at that word. In the ancient world, a covenant was a legal binding agreement between two parties that brought them into a special relationship. It had to do with business, had to do with politics, it had to do with everything. Today, we have contracts, we have lawyers that draw up contracts, explain them to us, hold them to us. We have courts. In a sense, things were as developed back then, but also simpler. There is one important difference to make here. A contract between men is one thing, and a covenant between God and his people is different. It is a one-way covenant. There is no negotiating going on here. There is God that wants to restore a relationship with his people that he created, and thus he writes it, submits it, says this is the contract, sign it or not. But if you do, these are the blessings. If you don't, these are the consequences. It's a one-way street, so to say. There's no negotiating that goes on in the kind of covenant you're going to see between God and his people. And we'll have to see who this people are, and that is an important aspect of our story of Abraham in this particular chapter. So Abraham, or Abram, as he will be called at first, and then as God renames him, he will be called Abraham. We'll use that second name or term for him. And the covenant that God makes with this one man in ancient Mesopotamia, about 4,000 years ago, something like that, is described in detail, beginning with the Genesis 11, and it carries out through up to chapter 25, the story of the founder of the Hebrew people, the chosen people of God. That's where you will find the covenant, the agreement, the pact that God makes with the one who will begin the Hebrew people of ancient times. So the story begins. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you." This is the first part of a one-sided deal. God comes to one man living around 40 centuries ago at the turn of around, it's second millennium before Christ. That's the best we can do in estimating when Abram lived, around the 21st or 20th century before Christ, 2000 before Christ. God comes to this man, and he comes to him in a real city, a developed civilization in what we call Iraq today, or southern Iraq, in what in ancient times was called Mesopotamia. When Abram is living, there's already a civilized group of people that are polytheistic, adoring man-made gods, worshiping man-made gods of various kinds, Marduk and Ishtar and Nimtun and many others. And he comes to him, and in the midst of a city that worships man-made gods, he comes to this man named Abram, and he sets before him a deal. And of course, Abram is either already or convicted of monotheism at this point. He is a one guy, while everybody else around him is a many gods guy kind of people. Let me quickly show you some evidences, archaeological evidences of that civilization, out of which Abram is being called. This is called a ziggurat. It was partially reconstructed by ancient kings, but also by a modern dictator. It's called a ziggurat. A ziggurat is a temple. It's like a staircase to heaven. And by the way, the worshippers did not go up these, only temple priests. You did not go into what were considered to be the houses of God, these temples of ancient Mesopotamia. This is evidence, the ziggurat of the city of Ur, where Abraham lived. This one was dedicated to the main god of the city, the chosen protector god, the moon god Nana. This was the epicenter of a huge city, as the Babylonian or Mesopotamian civilization had established a major urban center on the bank between the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the land between the rivers. Abram is called out of a city that had running water and civilization and agriculture and houses and buildings and bakeries and canals. He's called out of that to go on the road, leave civilization, and trust God to take him to a land that he's going to give him, far away from this one. Go on a long journey. You're going to have to trust God on this one. I will make your name great. These are the promises that God makes to Abraham if he will leave Ur of Babylon, Ur of Mesopotamia. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all people on earth will be blessed through you. So, the covenant that comes kind of like a lightning out of heaven to one man in the city of Ur about 4,000 years ago says, you're going to have to leave here and go on a long journey. But if you do, if you operate in faith, then I will give you a great name, and you will be a blessing to people around you. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. So here is a quick listing of the promises made to Abraham. I will give you land. Land, of course, is a sign of, in ancient culture, of wealth, of prosperity, because land in an agricultural society was everything, both for pasture, for animals, and for crops. I will give you a land, but you've got to leave, and you got to live in a tent instead of a civilized city. You got to live in a tent. uh, for the rest of your life, but I'm going to give you land. I'm going to give you many descendants. You're going to have many children and grandchildren and thereabout. That's a second promise that he makes. You are going to be a great blessing to humankind and to the species, is the third blessing that he makes. And depending on how people around you interact with you, their relationship with you, you will be a blessing to others, or you will be a curse to others, because how people treat you will make a difference in my relationship with them. So here are the promises in this covenant, one-sided covenant made by God, by Jehovah, with Abraham, a man that will be the founder of the Hebrew people. This is a quick map of the geography of where this story takes place, because it's not myth. Again, if you look at down on the right side towards the bottom, you'll find in ancient Babylonia, Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, it's modern-day Iraq, the city of Ur, and there is a line that is drawn that shows us the long journey, and it's not a straight shot across. You have to go up and then come down along the coast, because you may see that the Arabian desert lies in between, but he has to go up towards Aram, Padam Aram, if you can find it in that map, and then down along the sea road, the coastal road, down towards what we will know as the Promised Land, which is Shechem, if you can find that name, and Hebron, and Beersheba, and those names that we'll see pop up in the narrative later on. It's a long journey, and it's a journey in which you leave a civilized city with running water, and you are in a tent for the rest of your life as you go that way. Another map that may make things a little simpler, you find again in yellow over to the right, the land from which Abraham is called to leave, and leave the land of his fathers and go up to Haran, traveling along the road along the Euphrates River. That's the major trade routes, and then down the coastal road towards what we call Palestine or Israel today, down towards Bethel and Jerusalem and Beersheba, so all names that will appear in the narrative of the story of Abraham. So the Lord said to him, there is a covenant that is offered, there is faith that is required, and there is a ceremony that takes place that's kind of unique. Let us read the words of Genesis and then give a attempt to interpretation. The Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abraham brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them. Let me back up here a second and give an attempt at an explanation here. This is most probably a ritual that is an acted sign in which the sacrificial animals that you see are detailed symbolize those that will be the descendants of Abraham, that is, all of the people of Israel. And the birds of prey may be the enemies that are going to attack and try to stop the story of the descendants of Abraham. And the fire pot and the torch possibly represent God's presence among them. So this is a ritual that has most probably a lot of historical significance in the centuries to come, long after Abraham is dead, of course, that will signify, that will, in a sense, seal the deal that God is making with this man, Abraham, and his descendants, which will be the chosen people. Another thing that appears after this offer of the covenant, chapter 15 of Genesis, in chapter 17, another sign of the children of Israel is the institution of circumcision. It is instituted and is a sign that identifies Abraham and any descendants of his with the covenant. So the male descendants of Abraham will be circumcised on the eighth day as a religious symbol of a covenant God made with them. This is a quick note to the fact that circumcision is not unique. Male circumcision is not unique to the Jews in ancient cultures. In fact, we can look at Egyptian mummies and find that they too practiced it. However, there is absolutely no evidence that the Egyptians did it for religious reasons or instructed by their gods. So it's a very unique feature of the Jews that the male circumcision being tied to a sign of the promise made of God, a requirement, so to speak, that is made, while other ancient people will or will not practice circumcision. The Assyrians and Babylonians will not, while the Egyptians do. None of them do it for religious reasons that we know of, while the descendants of Abraham will only do it for religious reasons. This will make them very distinctive within the ancient cultures. So this is as much as your textbook finds time in this quick survey to deal with the founder of the Hebrew people and the concept of covenant, but it does quickly address then the next 25 chapters, from chapter 25 to 50 of the book of Genesis, the rest of the book of Genesis in a glimpse, truly. Descendants of Abraham are mentioned in quick fashion because the covenant that God made with Abraham continues through his son Isaac, and then one of his sons of Isaac, Jacob, who will also be called Israel. Israel is named for one of the patriarchs of ancient times, but also will be the name for, of course, the descendants of people as a whole and the nation today. And, of course, Jacob's 12 sons, and that important number appears here in these chapters of the first book of the Old Testament, as it details the stories of the beginning of the chosen people of Israel, or of Abraham, as the father of the Hebrew people. I am the God of your father Abraham. This will be the refrain that you will hear on and on again as descendants of Abraham after his death will need to remember whose they are, where they came from, and the covenant that God made with their forefather or father Abraham. I am the God of your father Abraham will be the refrain that will be heard continually. I will be with you. Again, the promise. God says, I'm not a God that takes vacations, breaks, absentee, promises things, and then doesn't fulfill them. But, of course, it is a two-way street. God will be with them when they are faithful and serve God the way that they are supposed to. If they do not, and of course, neither Abraham nor none of the patriarchs are described as perfect. They are flawed individuals, but the point is what the major defining factor. God uses imperfect people, imperfect human beings, imperfect patriarchs. They make mistakes. Sometimes they're big, but God promises he is faithful even when men are not. I will be with you. God makes this promise, but of course there is also a time when men drive God to turn his back on them. They must carry the covenant. In the narrative of chapters 25 through 50 of the book of Genesis, there is the story, of course, of the son of Abraham, Isaac, and then his sons, Jacob and Esau. Our artistic rendition that you're looking at here is from the 15th century gilded bronze panel on the doors of the baptistry in Florence, Italy, done by a great artist and a goldsmith by the name of Ghiberti. This is one of the most beautiful scenes, or what Michelangelo will call the gates of paradise. This is a story, of course, of the two brothers, older and younger, and the younger is given by his older brother his birthright. The younger brother has to fake out his father to get the blessing, the double blessing of what is supposed to go to the firstborn. And so Jacob becomes the one through whom the lineage is going to continue rather than Esau. One of the many narratives, detailed stories that are contained in these chapters, the second half of the book of Genesis. Jacob, of course, will be the one of the descendants of Abraham that will have the 12 sons. And here's where a very important number. The 12 sons will beget, of course, the 12 tribes of Israel. And while we're not going to be required in this quick survey to know all the names, the textbook does emphasize the storyline as it carries out, in particular, through the one of the sons of Jacob, and his name being Joseph. So maybe you recall or do not, but Joseph is envied by his brothers, and thus he is sold to some Midianites, foreign pagan people that are traveling through, and inconceivably he is sold away. He's not killed, but he disappears, taken by these Midianites into the land of Egypt. And thus here's another one of the panels from the Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise. And it is a artistic rendition of the brothers selling Joseph to merchants, to traders, to travelers that will take him into a foreign land, while the Jacob is told that Joseph is no more. This is an important part of the narrative of these latter chapters of the book of Genesis, because in spite of the fact that Joseph has this terrible event happen to him due to the jealousy of his brothers, Genesis 39 says the Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Tasked with serving the captain of the guard of the Egyptian pharaoh. Things are well because he's honest, talented, capable, a good manager, and reliable. All of these traits serve him well, and God blesses him. Of course, you may remember that God, the storyline and the thread of how God's going to fix the terrible disaster of Genesis 3 is playing out thread by thread through these various actions. Here we're told in Genesis 39:21, the Lord was with Joseph. He showed him kindness, granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Why is Joseph in prison? Because the wife of the captain guard, Potiphar, her name, tried to seduce him. Joseph resisted and therefore was accused of having attacked her and thrown unjustly into prison. But God still, even in such terrible circumstances, is with him, and we see the fortitude and the faithfulness of this young man, handsome and talented young man that befalls again, innocent as he is, in terrible circumstances. The rest of the story, of course, shows Joseph being restored and becoming, in fact, the vizier, the second-hand man of Pharaoh himself. And then the book of Genesis narrates how the brothers of Joseph are forced to make a long journey from where they live in Palestine because of a famine. And thus, they and then their father, Jacob, have to leave because of famine and come live in Egypt. And of course, then the day comes when they find out that their brother Joseph is actually the vizier, the most powerful man in the land of Egypt, as given authority by the Egyptian Pharaoh. The day comes when Father Jacob dies, and suddenly the 11 brothers are aware that that which maybe protected them up to that point from the wrath of their brother Joseph is gone. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they sent a message to their powerful brother Joseph. What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. So they, in a sense, live in fear and try to take a step towards protecting themselves by giving a message to Joseph of instructions supposedly coming from the dead father. This is what you are to say to Joseph. They quote their father as saying, I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servant of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. So there is a second very intensely emotional moment between Joseph and his brothers. The first being when Joseph reveals himself to them in Egypt as being alive and the vizier of Egypt. But the second one being here when he finds with them to start forgiveness, and they know that they are not going to see the vengeance of their brother which they sold into captivity. Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. The highlighted portion of these touching words of Joseph to his fearful brothers. Look, you did have a certain intent when you sold me years ago when I was but a boy, about a teenager. But God has a larger plan, and even the evil intents or bad intents of man. God intended this. His story is going to play out to accomplish that which is now being done. And so many lives of not only his brothers, but also of many people that they bring with them from the famine in Palestine they're being saved by the fact that Joseph is vizier, second-hand man, right-hand man of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And that is the way to look at it, to look at not at yourself as an individual story, but how your story plays out in the larger scheme of God's plans for the good of mankind. So this chapter was a quick look, very quick look at the concept of Abraham, the story of Abraham, his descendants, and a covenant. The Abrahamic covenant will drive the story of the whole Bible, and indeed of the Old Testament. and into the New Testament, where it will find its ultimate fulfillment and consummation in Jesus Christ. The point is, this is not just something that happened to a man or to some of his descendants 4,000 years ago or 38 centuries ago. It is a larger story that needs to be viewed. It needs to be viewed in the context, all of these stories, of a larger story that the Bible tells. So, things to apply as suggested by your textbook. God is the one who comes to man, comes to us, and he offers a way out, a way up, a way back. He offers us salvation, a restored relationship with him. It is a one-sided thing. We can't do anything. Man can't do anything. It is God's plan to use Abraham and his descendants to do something to fix that which is broken. And what is required, however, of Abraham and man is faith. That is, when Abraham is told, leave civilized city of Ur, and then I will give you, Abraham has to take it on faith. The father of the faithful, Abraham, he will not be a perfect man by any chance, as some other details of the story might account for, but he will fulfill through his faith and the fact that he left Ur and went to the promised land. He will be the father of the faithful, be an example of faith in God. Now, what we're going to do in the next lecture is go back to something that your textbook did not talk about in its quick survey, a moment in the life of Abraham that's very important. So the next lecture will be focus on Genesis 2. We're going to look at the story of Abraham and the sacrifice of his son Isaac.